Introducing the fabulous Nadiya Shah, French Vanity Fair named Nadiya one of the top 12 astrologers on the planet, crowning her a pioneer in video astrology. She is an award-winning astrologer, author, media personality, and is one of the few people in the world to hold an MA in the cultural study of cosmology and divination from the University of Kent, United Kingdom. Several of her books debuted as #1 new releases in astrology on Amazon, including Of Raven and Dragonflies, The Body and the Cosmos, Prayers to the Sky, and The Universe is Wise and Loving. Her school, Synchronicity University, teaches astrology worldwide. Nadiya's wildly popular YouTube channel is watched by faithful friends, fans, and superstars around the world. And you can visit Nadiya's website at nadiyashah.com. And Nadiya primarily uses the Placidus house system, and you can find her on YouTube, Instagram, Threads, Facebook, and TikTok. And Nadiya will be teaching a course this summer for Kepler College looking at media strategies for astrologers. And without further ado, let's get into the video.
We are looking at the Great Sextile of the mid-2020s. We're going to get a little bit of a taste of it this year, but next year we are going to have a near Star of David configuration. And this is one of these peak moments really of the decade. And so we are going to be touching on where we've been a little bit, but I really want us to look at charts at where we're heading, like where we are now and where we're heading. And I hope this helps us to plant a sense of possibility. Now, like I said, I do have Saturn in the first house. I don't want to be a downer, right? But we are going to have to touch on some of the ways in which, some of the complicated ways in which some of these energies might play out. And one thing I've been saying to people is this year gives us a taste of energy that we are going to dive into in 2026. And another thing that I've been saying for years, I mean, going all the way back to 2017, I've been saying the world we start the 2020s with will be a different world than we end the 2020s with. And it is this year a little, but really next year, that is going to help be the big bridge of an energy that takes us to that very other place. So here, let's look at this chart very quickly. Okay, I won't get into too much detail, but let's just say there was a lot of going back and forth about when this talk was going to happen. And then I didn't even realize it, but it was booked for right now. So after all of that talk, it just ended up being at the regularly scheduled time, which is totally fine. I thought, okay, if this is Uranus conjunct the sun, like, of course it is, right? Uranus conjunct the sun is like, oh, you got plans? You watch what I got for you. And here we are here together. And what we have here together, this chart, well, a wonderful thing is the conjunction of the sun and Uranus conjunct the part of fortune, right? That's really nice. What I'm really encouraged by is the fact that Jupiter conjunct Fortuna at the very top of the sky, conjunct the midheaven. This really could go in all kinds of directions, okay? We really could go all kinds of ways here. And I think there's going to be way too much talking, perhaps. And so let's bring that intention now that we are guided by love and wisdom. We are guided by sharing with each other from a place of genuine excitement and a sense of looking forward at the very best. Because, like I said, look, I remember Jesse Innocent, when he taught at my school, he said that if the universe wanted peace, there would be no Mars, there would be no Pluto, or at least if the universe wanted peace all the time, there would be no Mars and there would be no Pluto, but there is. And so we're going to talk about Pluto in particular, and we have to talk about the range of energies that are going to be happening. But my hope is that at least we here can contribute to what feels empowered in some way. And my hope is that at least we're able to recognize the immense opportunity we just might have to be able to do what it is we feel called to do in our respective worlds. And that includes in the world of astrology as well. So I'll explore all of that with you. And as mentioned earlier, I have a course coming up this summer. Every summer, I think this is my 6th year teaching this class. We used to call it YouTube for Astrologers. Now it's called Post and Prosper. You can find out more on the Kepler site. But I mean, it's just such a privilege to be a mentor to people. And I know that some of the students who took that course previously are in the chat and have said lovely things. And I appreciate you guys so much. But it really is mentorship that this course offers. And it takes you from the very internal spiritual side of spiritual entrepreneurship, the technical stuff of actually posting, and then how to actually create prosperity for yourself in the process. That is all a part of the journey that you'll be undertaking with me. And just thank you in advance for your trust. And again, learn more about that on the Kepler site. So let's dive in here. Thank you again. Welcome again. Here's what we're going to be looking at today. The players, right? The big moves, their big moves rather. We have the big outer planets moving from water and earth into air and fire. Now that in and of itself will have a lot feeling very different, but also understand how the transition itself suggests us moving forward. But also, how is it that these key archetypal energies of Uranus, of Neptune, of Pluto, how is it that those energies that ultimately have a quality to them, and this is something I really explored in my most recent book of Ravens and Dragonflies. I was talking about how, because that book looks at the transits of the outer planets through the houses of the natal chart specifically. And I talk about how the outer planets have this draining quality to them that we often overlook. We love to focus, I don't know about you, but with me, with my Sag moon, I love to be like, rah, rah, yay, everything's great. But I'm not Pollyanna. And all of the outer planets, they necessarily, as part of their core energy, mean that they represent transition. They represent things changing, especially when they change signs. And a part of that means they're going to have a draining quality to them. They're going to create space for something new to enter. Now, what might that be is part of what we're going to explore, but that's part of what we're going to be looking at, how these big planets are transitioning. And we're not only looking at the three big outers, Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto, but we're going to look at Saturn because I think Saturn is an important player. We're going to look at Chiron because I actually think Chiron moving through Earth of Taurus just might be our saving grace. And the saving grace is questioning. When faith is healthy, it questions itself. When faith is healthy, it wanes. And for a culture, for a country, for a community to be vibrant, to be viable, it has to grow, and it can only grow through questioning. And I think that in this way, if it was just the grand sextile, the great sextile, if it was just that, I would be like, whoa, watch out, okay. And we get some of that at key moments, but I do think that we'll get enough of Chiron in Taurus squaring Pluto, and then Saturn catching up and squaring Pluto and meeting Chiron. I think all of that is going to be what we actually need to ensure that we don't just live in a space of passion and ideas, but we're actually remembering that we are physically incarnated for a reason, and that it isn't about getting carried away on ideas, but what does that actually mean for people in a real way? What does that mean for the economy, the viability? What does it matter what the economy says if it says there's hundreds of trillions of dollars if the majority of a population are nowhere near anything that could be considered prosperous? How do we change that? These are going to be big, important questions that are going to come up for the collective, astrologer or not. And that's where Chiron in Taurus ends up being a saving grace and more. So we're going to explore that as well. We're going to look at a couple of big moments so far, and then what has yet to be. But more importantly, I'd love for us to end with an exploration of what this might mean for astrology and how we might understand what this is going to mean for the future of astrology in particular, because I have heard a lot of very lofty looks forward, which I hope to be true. But it's a good idea for us to question all of it and to take different things into consideration as to what the possibilities just might be for us. I like to have a quote to kick us off. The only thing we know about the future is that it will be different. That's what we know for sure. Okay, let's dive into the players. How's everybody doing? I hope everybody's feeling good, ready to jump in here. So let's do it. Let's start with Saturn. Here are some key dates to keep in mind with Saturn over the course of this decade. And we'll look at key moments with this as well in a moment, but understand the energy of Saturn. We like to think about Saturn as the taskmaster, right? Like you guys can throw out some keywords of Saturn, right? A Saturn transit or just the core energy of Saturn. What would you think? You'd think taskmaster, right? You'd think like hard lessons, karmic lessons, Achilles heel. I remember way back in the day as a teenager learning astrology. And these were the keywords we saw at the time, right? The Achilles heel in the chart. But really, Saturn has a duality to it. And this is actually going to be a theme for this decade, where so many of the signs in which planets are moving into, they represent a strong duality. And as much as Saturn is the ruling planet of Capricorn, which is where a lot of these words come from, like taskmaster and karma, and you get what you give, and you reap what you sow. That is what we think about with Saturn. These are all very Capricornian understandings of Saturn. But Saturn is the ancient ruling planet of Aquarius. And even though in modern times for modern astrologers, Aquarian energy has rightfully taken on these very electric vibes, taken on vibes of technology and the future. We're going to explore that when we get to Pluto in just a moment. And even though all of that is the case, we have to remember that Aquarius was always in some way visionary, but it had the Saturnian understanding of diligence, scientific inquiry, an exploration of ideas. And there was an understanding as fixed air that some of the most brilliant ideas, some of the most world-changing ideas that come about, two things: they don't exist in a vacuum, right? Ideas don't just pop up out of nowhere. If you look back, there is always a lineage, always, I would say. There's always an older appreciation of whatever seems so new, so revolutionary, so out of nowhere. There's always a history to it in some way or another. But what we also see is, in order to really make an idea count for something, right? To really understand its nuance, to really be able to understand its power and its potential, you've got to sit with it, right? It is a relatively new phenomenon, how our brains work now so quickly. You have a thought, you Google it, you get the answer to that random thought, and then you just kind of move forward. And for some of us, we forget what we even Googled an hour earlier. I mean, that's how quickly it can feel like life goes, or the lived reality of our experience goes. But Aquarian energy is patient, and it's especially patient with ideas. And that's part of what Saturn represents as well. It is an energy that invites us to consider the larger consequence, but it's more like the long-term consequence. Saturn invites us to take its energy and also make it personal, make it more relevant to us. As much as it is about the collective, it speaks to our individual ability to hold a thought. Where are we free more than anything else? It's been said by philosophers for literally thousands of years that the only place we are really free is on a level of thought. What's happening here? As soon as we're seeing right now in the world, as soon as you speak it, as soon as you write it, as soon as you express what's here, it no longer becomes something to express a space of freedom. It becomes something else. It becomes an affirmation, and every affirmation has consequences. And with Saturn, the containing energy, the ancient ruler of Aquarius, we're seeing some of that right now as well. And what that might mean in a larger sense, I think that's part of the piece that Saturn is going to invite us to look at. in the years ahead as part of the rest of this decade. Now, Uranus is the revolution, we like to think of it. And right now we've got Uranus in Taurus. And Uranus in Taurus is inviting us to look at money differently, right? And we see this right now. A lot of people are talking about the future of work with AI, right? This is going to be a huge topic that comes up again and again. But really, it's almost like we're now talking about it, but it's been in the works for a really long time. And it's like by the time we're talking about it, it's already the case. It's already reality. But Uranus is revolutionary energies, but what's revolutionary more than anything? It's ideas. And so, yes, right now, Uranus has been stirring things up, shaking things up. What else does Uranus do? You guys can let me know in the chat, throw out some keywords, what Uranus does as a general principle, as an archetypal energy, right? It brings truth, it brings revolution, it brings chaos, it brings a sense of rebellion. It brings energies that feel like they cannot be contained. And yet Uranus has been in Taurus, another fixed energy. This time, fixed earth is what we've looked at. And this has invited a lot of us to look at money differently, how we earn money differently. A few years ago, at the beginning of 2023, I remember I was visiting Spain. If you follow me online, you know how much I love to travel. I just, earlier this year, I promised myself I'd do 50 countries before I turned 50, and I did it. I did it this March when I went to Guatemala. So that was really an exciting moment for me. But having said that, you know, what was so fascinating about the conversation I had at the beginning of 2023 with my dear friend, he and I went to university together. He was studying computer science at the time. In the years that followed, he's now become a professor of AI. And so he actually teaches on this stuff, teaches the computers, the chips, and all of that. And I was asking him, you know, what does he think about AI? And all these people are worried about, you know, what's going to happen. And he said a few things that really stood out to me. So one of the things he said was, it's about reimagining work is what's going to have to happen. We literally are going to have to reimagine what work actually is. And there's been a lot of talk recently about manufacturing jobs, bringing back manufacturing jobs. But the thing to remember, and I'm going to invite you to consider this, Apple, when the Apple phones came out, right? What was happening at those very first factories that people were manufacturing these phones, where you went into a massive room and saw thousands of hands just working on putting together these things, one little piece at a time. So one person is just adjusting this thing, and then it goes to the next, and then another person adjusting this little thing, and it goes to the next and the next. Well, what you had, and I'm sorry, trigger warning here, but what you had was people at the company where you worked, you got one day off a month, that's it, right? At these factories overseas. And what you had was people unaliving themselves. And it led to a few things. One was, well, the management had to learn to be better, to communicate better. But the other thing was people had to sign a contract saying that they wouldn't unalive themselves on the job, basically. They would wait until it was their day off and they weren't on campus or on the grounds of the factory. They put nets to prevent people. Now, why is that? Because there's a reason that certain manufacturing factory work is seen as, and you know, some people laugh about it, but we call it soul crushing for a reason, because it's almost like that's not what human beings were ever really meant to do. The same exact motion, right? A very limited sense of 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. And you do that like 100 times over the course of an hour. You do that again and again over the course of an hour. How quickly it is that people burn out. And that's a healthy response to an environment like that. And so with Uranus and Taurus, it's been seen as, well, look, It is that actual physical manufacturing, turning the human being into a machine that was part of the Industrial Revolution. That's what is ultimately going to help people be empowered financially. But the truth is, we are so much more. And I think that's part of Uranus and Gemini. It's to remind us that we have a mind. The mind desires stimulation. The mind desires to contemplate, consider, to be occupied with different things, with different stimuli. Now, how can we do that effectively? And how is it? My hope is, because we're about to get a little taste of Uranus and Gemini soon, coming up this July, that this whole idea of reimagining, not just work, but human contribution. What might that look like? What is it that the human being brings that a computer can't, right? I don't know about you, but have you gone online lately? There's been a lot of discussion. You know, I keep track of this because it's my work to be on social media, but there's this big trend right now of people getting frustrated by the fact that so many YouTube channels and Instagram accounts are AI, right? I wish I had kept it and kept the name, but I literally saw this Instagram account, and it had about 100,000 people following. And as I watched this, to me, it was like the most obvious thing that this is an AI astrologer. Like, it was literally someone, like an image that was pretending to be an astrologer that was speaking and saying certain things. But I was like, that's AI. Those movements are a little bit too jerky. How long is it going to take before the movements are not jerky? How long is it going to take before it really feels like a real person? Well, then what is that going to mean for those of us who create content, who put ourselves out there, right? I think these are part of the contemplations and considerations of where is a human being with this move of Uranus, Taurus to Gemini? Where is it that we are embodied and people, but we can be machines and we can go on automatic? And where is it that we have minds? Where is it that we desire to learn? Where is it that we desire to grow? Now, Uranus in Gemini, of course, Gemini being a sign that has to do with a few different things, but one of the things I think of is early childhood education is part of what the energy of Gemini represents, right? It's the grade school years for kids. Now, how might we approach teaching children differently? At what point are technologies good and where are they not? How much can we actually control what kids learn? And where is that not a good thing or a healthy thing? And what types of controls make sense? And what type of truths? Because Uranus is also about truth. And I think one thing that we're really starting to see, and we'll get to this in a moment when we look at Pluto in particular, but we're seeing this very strong desire to control what truth is and what truth is allowed to be shared. And even if it's an opinion, to have that restricted as well. We're already starting to see it, but it is in our human nature, I would argue, to rebel against that, because we have an innate desire, perhaps, to be free on some level or another. We have to be free. And for many of us in the world, it might only be on the level of our thoughts and our level of our mind, but that's something that some of us get to have, or most of us get to have, even if nothing else feels like it aligns with that. And so I think we're going to see this interesting contrast, right, between what kids are learning, because what kids learn shapes their brains, it shapes their reality, it shapes them for the rest of their lives, but also where is it and how is it that more people are going to be reaching for a different kind of freedom? Now, Gemini energy is also a very creative energy, right? Taurus can stay the course, right? It can toe the line. It can be that diligent. It can put aside sort of, momentary distractions and instead understand where it's going. And so that energy of brilliance can find a container, but in Gemini, not as much. Now, a lot has been said about the fact that every time Uranus goes into Gemini, there's war, right? A lot of people have been talking about this. I will say this, and very respectfully, I will say this. We now, as human beings, we live in times of greater peace and prosperity and equality for more people on the planet than ever before in human history. That is true. But we are very far from it being really a norm, the thing and the way that it really should be for everybody. We are far from that still. And I would argue that we as people, human beings, no matter where you are on the planet, we are, even if you look at it from an astrological perspective, in the West, right? Western astrology and Eastern astrology, sidereal versus tropical. We understand the planets in relation to us differently if you are using a tropical zodiac or a sidereal zodiac. But understand that both of these come out of a philosophical understanding of the world around you. And so, in a world where there are factors that you have no power over, where you come from an environment where so much of your life is decided for you, and those environments absolutely exist now, well, then it makes sense that the planets, their relationship to fixed stars, their relationship to each other is what's going to be priority, because that's happening out there. But in a tropical zodiac, the planets and where they are is rooted in our perception of them. It's rooted in where the planets are in relation to the earth. And that represents a very different philosophy. It is a different philosophical assertion. Where you find sidereal, the cultures where you find sidereal more dominant, in those cultures, the family and the community tends to be the nucleus of the culture. But largely in the West, I would say, we use tropical. And that is because in the West, the individual is the nucleus of the culture, of society. The individual is the nucleus. And both have value, but too much of either, it creates problems as well. Too much of the individual being the nucleus of society leads to what Max Weber calls the alienation of postmodernism, where we live in closer quarters than ever before, but we're more isolated from each other than ever before. And that creates epidemics of loneliness and depression that feel very rampant at times for some people in big cities, certainly. But cultures where the community or the family is the nucleus of the culture, that's not good either if it prevents you from being truly you. If the culture, if the community, if your family doesn't support what it is that it is to be authentically you, that can be soul crushing to the individual. As much as it's wonderful to have the support of family and community, that's not always the reality. And so too much of either has created problems. However, it's important to understand whatever you bring to the sky is what you're going to get. And that includes how you're interpreting their position. Okay. Now, I say all this because it's interesting to think about how with war, all of that is to say, there's always war somewhere. Always. There's never been a time in human history where the entire planet was at peace. Never. Somewhere on the planet, there's always been war. It's just that because we live in a space where we are the nucleus of society, we are the nucleus of culture, we only see things from our perspective, right? Now, that's not to say maybe certain countries do have strife at certain cycles. Certainly it's possible, but even that, I would invite you to consider, how might that be different now? And how much of what invites conflict is a different perspective. It's a different way of looking at things and a different way of wanting things, because you see things differently, but there are these forces that say, or there's another side, equal or not, sometimes way more powerful, sometimes way less powerful, but there are these contrasting desires. And that conflict is what we can say contributes to war. And so, is it possible? Of course, it's possible. But again, I would say there's always conflict. It's about how we choose to participate in it. We're going to explore that a little bit more in a bit, but let me just say this as well, because we are moving towards all this air, Pluto and air, Uranus and air. The last time that happened was about 100 years ago. We're going to look at that at the last slide when we look at the future of astrology. I think that this is fascinating, but remember, there's the kind of war that we have that can be very physical and, you know, that sense of a very Aries type of expression, which even that is going to go through a shift. But then there is that the mind stuff, right? The control of information, the validation of what's approved of, the suppression of what isn't. That's also, some would argue, a type of conflict and a type of war. Let's talk about Neptune, okay? Now, Neptune, Pisces to Aries. My humble opinion is, since 2012, we as astrologers have seen a big boon in astrology, right? We've seen astrology discussed in major publications and newspapers in a way that we hadn't seen in a very, very, very long time. And many of us got very giddy about this, right? My humble opinion is we were seeing this because of Neptune in Pisces, because Neptune in Pisces is a desire for higher meaning, mystical meaning, a desire for connection. Think about this. We as astrologers, because this is a professional, you know, like we're all students of astrology here, some further along that journey than others. Consider that where it is that, okay, let me put it this way. My brother got married 10 years ago in Vegas. I went to Vegas, of course, and when you're in Vegas, there's lots of people sitting around doing tarot readings and psychic readings, and there's lots of other things going on too, right? Vegas is awesome. Vegas is like a lot of everything. Whatever you're into, you're going to find a whole lot of it. Like literally, you could just immerse yourself in it. Whether you're a really spiritual person, you go out to the Red Rocks. If you want comedy, if you want music, whatever you might be into, and even more, right? And so I was walking by, there was like this little, you know, setup, and someone inside was doing tarot readings in there, right? So I decided to go and get a quick tarot readings because all of us together, we were all sort of doing this and having fun at it. And when I sat down, I felt something really interesting that I think just about everybody who sat down in front of us as a client and asked us to look at their chart has likely felt. And this actually goes to something that Carl Jung discussed, where he said that there is something very deep in the collective unconscious that sees the astrologer as the intermediary of the gods. And this was actually an idea that was expanded on by one of my dear professors, Patrick Curry. And he talked about how we, up until very recently in human history, very recently, up until like the discovery of Uranus, actually, astrologers were the intermediaries of the gods. The astrologers were the people that people went to for spiritual guidance, for spiritual advice, sort of on a mass scale is what we saw. And in fact, in some parts of the world, like in India and South Asia, they're still called pundits or guru, which is a type of, I would say, not very nuanced way to say that they're a kind of a priest, you could say, but yeah, they are. They are people who in their own way are speaking to the will of the gods. And we see this as a very deep part of human history. And even though we as astrologers know that this is a skill, that's what this is, and anybody can learn it. And that's something I always try to affirm. I love to affirm that. However, for so many of us, I would say for the collective unconscious, there's some part inside that still sees the astrologer, that still sees the reader as an intermediary of the gods, as the voice of the gods, really. And so that does come with a lot of responsibility, right? Now, I say this because I think that feeling of wanting to know what the voice of the gods is, that feeling to want to glimpse the mystery, that feeling of feeling as if I'm connected to the planets, then I'm connected to everyone and everything, and then I'm not alone, and then it all makes sense. Everything has a rhythm and a purpose. Even if I'm feeling whatever I'm feeling right now, there is some higher rhythm and perfection to it. That need to feel that is one of the needs that astrologers in our modern world, we address that need. And I think that that need, that spiritual need, wherever Neptune goes, it changes our understanding of the spiritual need that we have. Wherever Neptune goes, it amplifies what spiritual need we might have in terms of that sign in particular. So this is why I think we've seen this upsurge of astrology in more recent years. It's Neptune in Pisces, but now we are already starting Neptune in Aries, and Neptune in Aries is a very different energy. And so historically, the last time Neptune was in Pisces, we saw, this was like sort of the dawn of the New Age movement, right? We saw like Madame Blavatsky and Alan Leo and all these amazing people. Well, Alan Leo came a little later, forgive me, but we saw this whole idea of spiritual understandings of the world. And this comes on the heels of the discovery of Uranus. So what happens with the discovery of Uranus in the late 1700s is, in an instant, just like that. Now, again, this wasn't in a vacuum. It was a long time coming, some would say. But the definition of science changed. So up until this point in human history, up until the discovery of Uranus, if you walked down a street and you saw a flock of birds, that meant something, right? You saw a flock of birds, you were able to connect that to something within. That is the journey of synchronicity, connecting the outer to the inner. And that's part of what astrology, according to Carl Jung in his later years, that's part of what astrology expresses, is the concept of synchronicity is what makes astrology relevant. Having said that, though, this connection, right, that everything that's physical has a spiritual component, is why you could have a Ptolemy who was an astrologer, but also an astronomer. You could not be one without the other. To be an astrologer was to also be an astronomer, and vice versa. To understand the physical phenomenon was to also contemplate the spiritual or energetic phenomenon. The discovery of Uranus takes place, and we have what's called the Cartesian split, which is, I think, therefore I am. I think, therefore I am is what we call this Cartesian split. It separates matter from spirit. It makes mind one thing and body another. And this is what splits sky and physical phenomenon from meaning. And there have been wonderful things that have come about as a result of this separation. One of the things that's been able to come about is equality, right? If you are not judged by your physical appearance, if your shell doesn't determine the strength and contribution you can make with your mind, well, it's from that appreciation that there is a separation that we start to see a greater assertion of equality based on gender, based on race, based on ability, right? There was a time in ancient Greece, it's actually documented, it's very, very sad, but I'm going to say, where if a child was born and they were different, right? They appeared different. There was this belief that there might be something wrong with the spirit, and it's showing up in the physical form this way. And we see it documented of people going up to a mountain, saying a prayer, throwing some herbs, and then giving the child back to the gods, right? This is abhorrent to us. Rightfully, this is abhorrent to us today. But this is the kind of thing that we see because there was this feeling, there was an understanding, there was a belief that the physical represents the spiritual. Well, with that no longer the case, the definition of science changes, where science becomes the contemplation of the physical reality, right? Physical phenomenon, what can be empirically proved. And so astrology as a science, because the definition of science changes at this time, it has nowhere to go. And this is also when, with the discovery of Uranus, that we have astrology chased out of Western universities. Today, we see some universities in India teaching astrology as a social science, but for the most part, especially in the West, astrology as a discipline, as a practice, is not studied at that level of the established institutions, right? We can study it academically, we can study it historically, we can say, oh, that person believed this and that person said this, but it's not like we are actually practicing astrology in these established universities, because that's just not something that is thought of. So we have this industrial revolution, we have this scientific revolution, astrology has nowhere to go. So what happens then? Astrology finds a home with the discovery of Neptune. And this is why astrology is New Age. Because I've heard people say, how is astrology New Age when it's so old? This is why. In the West, astrology sort of was up in the air, it was vilified, it had nowhere to go. And then after this time of hyper scientism with the discovery of Uranus, the discovery of Neptune brings with it this pendulum just going the other way very dramatically. And that pendulum going the other way is saying, what about soul? What about spirit? You know, what about what I feel? What about my desire for meaning? And this is where we have all these spiritual movements start to arise very strongly in the New Age movement and spiritualism and seances and all that stuff. Well, Neptune can be a lot of illusion, right? We know that as well. In addition to spiritual meaning and feeling and connection, it can be illusion. And there were some people who took advantage of the real need that people had to connect with spirit, to connect with soul, maybe connect with their loved ones, right? People took advantage. And so what happens is Neptune moves into Aries. We still have this continued growth of the New Age movement. But what we start seeing is very vocal, very powerful detractors to astrology and other esoteric practices. This is where they become that much more amplified in their voices. Now, this is also where we start to see more and more spiritualities that are rooted in free will. And so a big characteristic of the New Age movement is that people would say, they didn't always, but people who were in the West would say that they went off to the East, right? And it could be different places depending on the person and what they were presenting. India was really popular. China was popular to say. Egypt was popular to say. But basically, these people would go off, or part of their mythos was they went off and they found this spirituality, and then they bring it back to the West and they package it for a Western mind in a Western audience. And this is where we see things like the law of attraction, for example. I mean, if ever there was a very Western application of spirituality, this is it. Because what you see is this reconfiguring, repackaging, reinterpretation of these very old mystical ideas that come from far away, that feel exotic, but they're made to help people achieve what they want. They're made to help people become prosperous, become, you know, all those wonderful things that we celebrate in a capitalist paradigm. And that's where you see things like the law of attraction really start to gain that much more popularity. And this is ultimately a spirituality that is rooted in free will. We start to see the celebration of entrepreneurship, but it is also about how you can make anything happen, right? It's not about these other forces, these other wills. It's not about planets. It's not about cards or any, it's about you. You are truly all that matters, all that exists. everything that happens to you is your fault. And of course, there are real criticisms we could have of that, right? But having said that, this is where we start to see the beginning of real discussion around the harm of things like fortune telling. And this is where you get some very loud detractors. Now, going back to what I touched on earlier in terms of war, yeah, Neptune and Aries, I mean, it's kind of like 1 + 1 = 2, right? You would think that this could bring with it like spiritual wars, nebulous wars, right? Energetic wars, or people who feel righteous, maybe even celebrated for their righteousness, for going to battle, metaphorically, but also literally as well. We see more support in terms of the art and the music that's supporting the noble spiritual battle that we might engage in, right? But we also see what is it that we're idealizing with Neptune? Because we start idealizing force. We start idealizing looking out for the self, and that's it. You are the only one that matters, and that's it. And so this is the world that we're now stepping into, a world that goes from maybe so much compassion that we feel tired as a result, maybe such a feeling of powerlessness, but finding beauty in it, to now entering a world with Neptune and Aries that says, no, what's beautiful, what's spiritual, what's divine is harnessing the free will, directing it where it is that you want it to go. Now, what I'm hoping for with this, though, is, as I do with all of these energies we're talking about, is that I hope it gives more people permission to do what they want with their lives, to be themselves, as long as they're not hurting anybody, to have more agency over their lives. That's a good thing. But how is it that we're going to support the healthy ways in which agency might be practiced, might be able to be realized in our lives? Okay, having said that, there are some other things I've written here. You might want to take notes. I think you guys get the PDF for this, right? But all of this is to say, there are lots of ways in which Neptune and Aries is likely to show up. We are at the very beginning of that, the very beginning. Now, Pluto, the underbelly. I don't know about you, but I talked a heck of a lot about Pluto and Aquarius, right? Pluto and Aquarius. Oh, I heard some of the most beautiful interpretations of this, like people saying, oh, this is going to be so great for astrology. And oh, it's going to, right? I hope so. That would be nice. I don't know how. I'm sorry, but I really don't know how that's going to be, because the discovery of the modern planet, the modern ruling planet of Aquarius, had astrology just vilified, chased out of Western universities. And now we've got Pluto and Aquarius. And I have been saying that I think this is going to be hyper scientism as a possibility. But we're seeing this play out in different ways right now, right? What is Pluto? Tell me, what do you think culturally Pluto represents? Wherever Pluto goes, what does it bring? Okay, I'd love to see this. It's a little tough for me to open up chat here. I'm trying to figure out how to show chat. There we go. I'd love to see if I can figure it out. Transformation, death, rebirth, total transformation, disruption. Yes. Chaos, war, possibly. Yeah. The truth will out. Yeah. Unearthing the dark. Yes. Thank you. Power. Yes. This is the dark side. Pluto is god of the underworld, the shadow. Thank you, Priscilla. Yes. Yeah, no, that's not true, Peggy. Astrology was in Western universities up until the late 1700s. It was studied as a social science. And so you might want to look into that, because I remember going to one of these universities in Spain and being told that, oh, this is where da da da. And in fact, in Andalusia, like I wrote my dissertation on Ibn Arabi, and Ibn Arabi was a Sufi mystic and astrologer. And he was very much a fixture in Andalusia and in Spain. And we see that he's connected to the universities at that time. He was a lawyer by trade, but then he kept his connections, and he went on to become this mystic and astrologer and things like that. So you might want to look into that. Okay, having said that, Pluto is the dark side. Pluto makes us look at what's not fair, makes us look at, what we want to feel isn't there, but then it's all this messiness that comes to the surface, right? Pluto in Libra. Pluto in Libra we saw how fraught and messy relationships were. This is where we finally started talking about things like domestic violence, right? We saw what happens when there was this very famous case, this woman, Betty something. I'm sure somebody knows, there was a whole mini series about her and stuff. And anyways, she met her future husband in university. She was studying. They got married. She got pregnant. So she said, okay, I'm going to support what you do. Her family even helped him as well to get an education. And first he went to medical school. He finished, but he said, I don't want to be a doctor. Then he went to law school. This whole time, right? They're living like not very well. She's taking care of his kids and everything. And then he finishes law school. He goes, to a, what's it called? A firm. He meets a young secretary. He divorces his wife and says, you don't get anything. She goes to court. She got nothing. She ends up in squalor. She loses everything. And then he starts torturing her with his new wife. Like literally, they're sending her all these awful things to really make her suffer. She ends up killing them, right? And this is wrong. This is bad. She's still in jail. But that is so Pluto and Libra, that whole story, right? We saw how messy, how unfair relationships could be. We had to confront it. What did we see with Pluto and Scorpio, right? We saw how, I think about the phrase silence equals death. If you were there, if you were around, I was a kid, and I remember, especially one of the school counselors who I loved so much got sick, right? Passed away from AIDS. And I remember how devastating that was to me to see that. And I remember how this community that had been in the shadows, had been sort of wanting to not be acknowledged, realized that if we don't say something, then nobody's going to care as all of us die. And that whole understanding of silence, of secrets, of sex, of the consequences of all that is what we had to confront with Pluto and Scorpio. Pluto and Sag brought with it how belief itself and making others the other, what's the consequence of that, right? How people, when faith is healthy, it questions itself. Pluto isn't good at questioning itself. So what happens when faith doesn't question itself? People do a lot of really crazy things. And we saw this across the board, across the world. We saw people doing things that made no sense, that were destructive to themselves and to others. And we saw a lot of othering, a lot of the sense of, no, we are this, they are that, they are so different than us. We are the best, they are the worst. We got to do something about the worst. We saw all of this take place, no real sense of reflection, of honesty. We saw a very deep sense of othering of all kinds of people taking place at that time. So we saw that. Pluto and Capricorn, what did Pluto and Capricorn just show us, right? You guys let me know. What did Pluto and Capricorn show us? It showed us that Pluto and Capricorn, it was really about understanding economic and status, empowerment and disempowerment. Okay, one of the most obvious things that I've seen, this idea of social mobility has become so restrictive. The more access that people got to credit, starting with Pluto and Scorpio, we saw people gaining access to more and more credit. And because of that, more people, that and a few other factors, people were able to live middle class. And what happened in tandem with that? The cost of higher education started going up and up and up. And what's happened now is, and what we really saw in a way that was very undeniable, we saw university become just prohibitively expensive. Its function has become to limit social mobility, even in places where they have prided themselves on social mobility being possible, you see this idea of university becoming so expensive, higher education, and the conversation has never been, well, what do we do to make it more fair? No, the conversation has been, why are you going to university? You don't need to go to university. So what ends up happening is these social structures, these hierarchies have been further affirmed as a result. And that's just one way, right? We saw like economic disempowerment feel very strong as well. And how that is one way that people are really limited in their options and so on. And that's just part of it. The bailouts of the banks, all of that was seen as very Pluto and Capricorn. It was the protecting of the power structures and how much that actually costs. Now, I will also say this. I went to university in England. I'm Canadian, so I went as an overseas student. I had to pay the overseas rate. Okay, it was what it needed to be. A few years ago, not even that long ago, it was during the pandemic. You know, you're home. I mean, really, I've always worked online. I love my freedom. And I decided to like kind of look up, hey, maybe I should do another master's. My mom is always bugging me to do a PhD. Hey, let me just look into it. Come to find out, the price now per year is more than double of what I paid, more than double, just over the span of like 15 years. And that at the time was already, it was like 25,000 just in tuition, another 25,000 in terms of student residence and all of that, all the other fees involved. And now the whole thing will be more than double that. And it just, to me, I was like amazed at that's what I was seeing. And so that is what I mean, that this whole idea of seeing the hierarchies staying in force, there are all different ways that people do that. Okay, having said that, Pluto and Aquarius. What are we seeing? What do you guys, what do you think? I'd love to see what you think. I will say, I'm seeing AI, right? And how AI is being used. I'm seeing how speech is being limited a lot in ways that actually have felt like, oh, I didn't see that coming. I didn't expect that to happen, right? That sense of, yeah, I mean, it's kind of amazing. It is. It has been amazing how Aquarius is about thoughts. It's about ideas. And Pluto brings with it consequences, like messy consequences, unfair consequences, consequences that can feel, if I may say again, trigger warning here, but abusive is part of what Pluto reveals. It makes us look at where unfairness and abuse and messiness and pain is, where we didn't want to acknowledge it before, where we didn't want to see it before. And now we're seeing it play out in terms of just having ideas, having opinions that aren't even that big a deal. But we're also seeing this type of detachment that I think is also scary as well. And yeah, that's part of what we've seen so far. Now, what I had hoped for, you see here, this slide was created a while back. And of course, the Matrix, right? A lot of us thought the Matrix. Now I have here years and years, it was a show. And this show showed this whole other world where people can decide to live in the cloud. So their consciousness can be separated from their bodies. And if they choose, they can say, you know what, I don't really need my body anymore. I just want to live in the cloud. And they can decide that and sort of the consequences. And I mean, this was a comedy in certain moments with this show on HBO, but it's interesting how so many of us thought that, oh, in the Matrix, you can be whatever you want. And it's all a digital reality in the digital world and all of that. Yeah, but what people are saying in the digital world is leading to consequences. And let me just say, right now, you might agree with some of it. And that's fine. You might like where the consequences are showing up and where they whatever. That's fine. You might agree with the power structure of the moment, and that's fine. But as we're going to talk about when we get towards the end, the final slide of this presentation, astrology has been scapegoated. It's been vilified. Astrologers, renowned astrologers, have had to go to court on fortune-telling charges and have been held to consequence, have been found guilty for practicing astrology. And that isn't even that long ago. We're talking about 100 years ago, right? A little more, a little less. It's not that long ago that we saw this. And so to me, my hope is with Pluto in Aquarius, my hope is that instead of thought police, we move instead towards a world that feels like various niches are allowed to exist, right? Like Aquarius is as much about the collective as it is hyper individualistic. And it is an energy that has a very strong duality to it. And so my hope is that with that duality, more of us are granted permission to do our own thing, to live our truth, to be able to have our space online is my hope. And we'll see what we co-create together as a result, right? We're going to see, but this is part of why Pluto and Aquarius, I mean, I hope I hope astrology is okay, and I hope it's okay for astrology. And so I will say also part of what we see because of that strong duality to it, we see a lot of relativism, right? And it's almost to the point of apathy for some people, where a lot of people aren't speaking up. And I get it. It's scary to speak up now. It's becoming more and more scary to say certain things. And it's one thing to choose what to say out of sensitivity, out of a desire to continue to be heard, but it's another thing to not say it, even if it's the most obvious thing, even if it's the thing that everybody's feeling, but you feel cannot be said. That might be because I'm already seeing some of that happen, and it's really scary and it's really sad, actually. And I hope it ends up being different. Now, Karen said, who will end up with power, humans or the machines we're creating? Well, that's an interesting thing of conversation that a lot of us are talking about. Now, interestingly, I heard a description of AI. And right now they're saying AI has the tendency to hallucinate, is what they're saying. AI has a tendency, and that's true, right? You don't know if you're asking AI a question, you don't know if that's accurate or not. Like, because it's just pulling things out of nowhere right now, but that technology is going to get more and more precise, more and more exact. So we'll look at the future of astrology towards the end, okay? So my hope is, like I said, that we have space. But what I will say is, yes, Evangeline Adams, Alan Leo, right? So we see these different cases happening. Okay. Yeah, so that's part of my hope, but we'll look at that. The thing to remember, though, is astrology has always been. Astrology adapts. Astrology is a living practice, and it has the ability to become whatever a people need it to be, so that it survives, so that it serves whatever society or cultural context it finds itself in. And in this way, astrology has been able to continue to thrive in its own way. Now there's thriving, that's celebrating, and then there's thriving, okay, leave me alone, let me have my little community, let me connect with people and do what I got to do and write my books and, you know, go to my conferences and teach my classes online. So that is my hope, that we have that space to do that, and to see how we become part of that evolving, right? Okay. What's happening? There we go. Okay. Let's talk about Chiron, then we can move on to look at some charts. We're making pretty good time here. Chiron shows us where, well, here's the thing I found with Chiron. Wherever Chiron goes, it feels like we got to pay attention. We have to do something. It feels like there's more to be done. There might always be an insecurity. If you just look at the natal Chiron in your chart, I have found that wherever your natal Chiron is, things don't necessarily feel easy, but there's something inside that feels like, I got to do this. It's got to get done. And so anytime I've seen someone with Chiron in the ninth, it's like they really feel like they got to either get educated, or they got to get their degree done, or they got to travel, they got to figure it out, right? Even if it's hard, even if it feels like there's all kinds of barriers up, there's a knowing on a very deep level that that's where my healing is, whether they're conscious of it or not. That's what they have to heal very deeply. And so the same is true with the collective, right? Chiron in Aries, where Chiron is now, is encouraging us to look at power, to heal our relationship with power. Yes, but now Neptune's moving in there, along with Saturn, right? And we talked about Neptune and Aries. Chiron and Taurus is going to be fascinating. I opened with an understanding of this, right? And we explored that, where I said Chiron and Taurus comes on the heels of the most exact moments of the Great Sextile. The Great Sextile, we'll see the chart in a moment. This Chiron in Taurus, I think, is going to be the saving grace, because if it's all trines and sextiles, you know this, right? If you've seen charts of people who have all trines and sextiles, usually you need to see like squares. You need to see tension in a chart that tells you that person gets stuff done, right? That person is going to do the work that manifesting, that accomplishment, that forward progress requires. You need to see squares and oppositions. And if you don't see them in the natal chart, then you start looking for them in progressions, for example, because that's when we see, okay, there's a period, an extended period of time where someone might be able to use what otherwise is just going to be taken for granted and make it count for something, make progress with it, ask the right questions, put in the work. I met a guy way back in the day, and I remember, this is before the dating apps, right? This is like dating websites. That's how long ago this was. And these were like new websites. And I met a dude and we went out. And I remember, of course, getting his birth time and date and everything. Not obvious about it. I've become very good at being, you know, kind of subtle about it. Like, hey, I was born at this time. What about you? Oh, yeah, that's your birthday. Hey. Okay. And then maybe like later on, I'll be like, yeah, how old are you? Oh, yeah. Okay. You know, so you're calculating it in your mind like a little computer, right? So I'm pretty good at it, like to feel it out, right? Okay, having said that, I remember looking at his chart, and this chart was all grand trines in Earth. Grand trines in Earth. That was the only thing in his chart, I'll tell you. It was shocking. It was surprising. And dude worked for Canada Post, and he worked in their office, and he was telling me how he got the job right out of high school, and he's just been doing that, like, you know, and he's perfectly happy. He had a little cubicle. He put up concert tickets, you know, by pin in his cubicle. That made him happy. He liked where he was. He didn't feel a sense of, okay, I got to do more. Maybe I should apply for this promotion. He did nothing like, no, it was like, yeah, I'm happy there. Yeah, it's a good job. Good people. Yeah, it's good. You know, like that was his reality. He was perfectly happy with that. Now, me with all kinds of squares and stuff in my, I was like, what is that like? What must that feel like? Because I don't know about that. But that was his truth, and that's fine. That was the chart he needs to do what it is that he was created to do in a highest, most loving vision for his life, according to Ibn Arabi. That's great. I think squares are saving graces. I think squares get things done. Squares ask questions, because if we're just going along for the ride, a lot happens and we might think it's good and it really might not be. Trines, sextiles, sometimes sextiles got enough tension in them so that you're backing it up with action, which is good. And in that way, sextiles can sometimes be more fortunate than a trine, but especially with a trine, everything seems perfect and wonderful and lovely and great. And so nobody's questioning what's happening. And there are these really big aspects coming that are going to bring dramatic change. And they need questioning. And thankfully, Chiron will kick in eventually. Chiron kicks in on the tail end to make sure we're asking about the actual consequences, what's actually manifesting, what about the body, right? We're all about ideas and people getting in trouble over ideas. What about what people are actually doing? Are we paying attention to that? Who's making the money based on what is being restricted and what's not being restricted, right? Who is it that's actually making the money? That's Taurus. What are we actually manifesting as a collective, but also individually? That's Taurus. And what are we healing and for whom? Whom is benefiting in a real way? What's the point of having huge medical breakthroughs? I don't know if you guys watch Black Mirror. You watch Black Mirror? It's really creepy, eh? Black Mirror. And it's all metaphor. It's like the modern day Twilight Zone. I grew up with black and white episodes of Twilight Zone playing marathon all night. I always, had issues with sleeping. Like I said, I have a Sag moon, so I never want the party to end. I want to be the last one to leave a party ever since I was a little girl. My mom says when I was a baby, it's like midnight would come and then I'd start waking up. Then she would see a difference in me. I'd be ready to play and be happy and everything. Yeah, I've always been like that. So even as a child, I would end up sneaking and staying up so I could watch these old episodes, black and white episodes of the Twilight Zone, Rod Serling's Twilight Zone. Black Mirror is like the modern day version of this, and it's so much in metaphor, but they were showing the first episode. I won't give any spoilers here, but basically this woman, she dies to be brought back to life. They utilize this technology, but the technology has a subscription to it and it just gets prohibitively expensive. And they have to do, especially her husband, really soul crushing things, really things that'll break your heart in order to keep his wife alive. I mean, to me, it's such a clear metaphor for where we are in terms of who has access to certain medications and things like that, right? That might be part of this as well. So we're going to see some of that. Now let's look at some charts here, okay? And then we'll open it up to Q&A, but I want to be sure to get through this very quickly. I don't know if you remember, but we did have a pandemic, right? It's amazing. Now I think back and I go, wow, all of us really did stay home. Everything did really shut down. And at the time, for example, my Prime Minister, Justin Trudeau, was very criticized, but on the other side of the pandemic, there was an election and he was reelected. It was like no harm, no foul, basically. I think he lost one seat. If you know, the Canadian system is different than the American system, but basically it's about, we have ridings, right? And however many seats, each riding has a seat. The people who have most seats, depending on your political party, whoever's the leader of that, they become the prime minister. It's not like we vote for a president the way that you guys do in the US. And so, yeah, it was like people kind of went along with it. There was an acceptance of it. And even it was after there was this big, a lot of people were talking about, it was called the Freedom Convoy or something. And all these truckers shut down parts of our capital. After that is when he was reelected. So it was kind of like most Canadians liked how he handled the pandemic, right? And I've heard people like very openly when they hear I'm Canadian, like one of the first, especially Americans, very quick to criticize him. But that's one thing, okay? Canadians saw it differently. The other thing is, I will say, he was one of the only world leaders that I saw who stood up for human rights in a way that I just never saw around the world, the way he spoke up, especially for Canadians around the world. I did not see anything like that coming from many of the world leaders. And for him, I'm so grateful for that. Like that alone made me feel like I would vote for him again. The courage that he showed. I don't mean to be controversial here. This is my humble opinion, and I know not everybody agrees. And I know he was very unpopular, so he got kicked out. Okay, fine. Sun conjunct Pluto in 2020. We stayed home. We let ourselves be restricted. And those people who felt like that's not what they wanted, there was a very quick holding back. The entire structure, the whole structure of society said restrict. And while it was also made very poetic, it was made very romantic, that we were doing this for each other. And that was a good thing. I think by the time we got to 2022, a lot of us were seeing it differently by then, right? I think a lot of us were done with that. Now, I'll just very quickly say the importance of 0 degree Aquarius. I've been saying to people, watch that degree, watch that degree. What happened? Saturn conjuncted Mars at 0 degree Aquarius at the end of March 2020. And that was social restriction. I'd never heard that phrase before. It shut the world down. Jupiter conjunct Saturn towards the end of 2020 at 0 Aquarius. That brought with it the beginning of things opening up. That brought with it vaccine and other medical advancements. And then in 2022, we had Mars conjunct Venus at 0 Aquarius. And that's when the world opened up more than before. Because I remember I was waiting for the world to open. I was like, I got to get out into the world. And it was right then that all these countries started announcing, if you're vaccinated and you have proof of vaccination, all of that, then you can come. And I mean, I didn't even bother thinking. I was like, I got to get out into the world. I have a Sag moon. I'm not staying in one place. Nope, I've got to get out into the world. And I will say, as a very avid traveler, as I mentioned, 50 countries, many of them I've been to repeatedly. As an avid traveler, I'd never seen it be so regimented before, where they really wanted all kinds of documentation. Before then, I would show up at most countries I would show up at, and they would be like, sometimes they wouldn't even look at me. They would just stamp my passport. Okay, good, have fun, blah, blah, blah. This time, it wasn't just that they wanted to see vaccination. They wanted to see where I'm going to stay. They documented where I'm going to stay. They put it into their computer. They wanted to see my return ticket, like all of that stuff that I just never seen before. And that sort of stayed the norm in some ways. What happened when Pluto moved over 0 degrees? We saw a few things, but the main thing that I saw was these amazing technologies starting to be launched. And we're at the very infancy of them. AI technology, the Vision Pro, the Apple Vision Pro. People say it's like nothing they've ever experienced before. It puts you in a whole other reality. These are at the very beginning, as part of the beginning of this 20-year journey. What happens in 2021? Saturn squares Uranus repeatedly. This is the ancient ruling planet of Aquarius and the modern ruling planet of Aquarius squaring off, figuring out what we're going to do with Aquarian energy. What is it going to mean for us? And this is where we start seeing people say, I want out. I want to get out there. And other people saying, no, please keep it locked, keep it down. No, we got to protect we got to protect this. We got to protect myself. We started seeing this tension happen in 2021 that was really strong, but you certainly started to see certain places, rebellious places, no less, right? Because I remember a client who was in Florida and she was saying, like, we pride individual responsibility. That's our values in this state, da, da, da. So she was very happy about the fact that her state didn't shut down. That's fine. That's the Saturn Uranus square playing out so strongly. The tension of that and what we're going to do with that is part of what we had to look at, right? Now, Saturn Jupiter square, I just want to say we're having another one coming up. Let's jump into looking at charts now. Jupiter Saturn square, the first two that happened last year were with Saturn in Pisces, Jupiter in Gemini. The one that's happening mid-June is in new signs, right? Cardinal signs, signs that represent beginning. Before they were mutable signs. It has to do with adjustment. It has to do with a flow, right? It has to do with allowing and preparing for things to be different. Cardinal is about what we're going to start. It's about what we're going to begin. Now, I do want to say on the tail end of June, later in this month, we are going to have, you know, some astrologers call Jupiter conjunct the sun every year the luckiest day of the year. Some of us like to think of it that way, or conceptualize it that way. But this year, what's going to happen with Jupiter conjunct the sun in the early degrees of Cancer? Both are going to be squaring Neptune and Saturn simultaneously. And I think that that might represent a moment that feels disappointing. It feels like there's so much hope, there's such elation, and then it ends up feeling like this should mean more. This should mean something different. And we're going to have to look at that as a collective. What are we beginning at this time? What kind of, I will say, I don't want to get too detailed about it, but I will say, I don't know, I debated saying it because I don't want a record of it, because who knows, it ends up in AI somewhere, someplace. But I will just say, literally this week, being raised by parents who are feminists, it has been so sad. It has been so sad these last few days, seeing, you know, I grew up with this constant reminder that I, as a woman, had a responsibility to live my life fully, to make the most of every opportunity, because there are women in this world who will never have that, simply because they're women and simply because of where they're born. And to see the last couple of days, like it doesn't even matter. Like these big business deals being made and the normalization and of places where women live, and they live in a way that nobody cares about, nobody pays attention to. And I just look at it, we look at it, my family, we've been talking about how nobody cares. Nobody cares about these generations of millions upon millions of women who live in apartheid. People love talking about apartheid. Nobody gives a damn about their apartheid. And it has been very disillusioning for some of us to see the last days. I'm talking about just these last days. And that's all I'm going to say about that, because there's also a lot of fear about saying anything, because it isn't just about what happens in one spot in the world. Now, power extends in a way that reaches far. And there's an awareness around consequences also, right? And so I don't talk about it publicly. I don't say things. I'm not going to say names of any place, but yeah, I mean, one thing travel has taught me is how incredibly privileged I am, just because of where I was born in Toronto, in Canada, just because I have a Canadian passport. And that is not something that comes out of nowhere. That is because my parents, they reminded me of that again and again. That was one of the things I remember hearing a lot when I was growing up. And economic empowerment for women being so important, so emphasized in my family. And it's been very disillusioning. That's what I'll say. It has been very disillusioning. And I think that's part of this square, honestly. Well, how else will we be disillusioned? Where else are we seeing people lose a lot because they have an opinion, because they call something out according to them, whether or not you agree with what they're calling out, whether or not you agree with what they say. I'll give you another example. I remember seeing, well, look, I'll say this. I am very cautious. If somebody's saying something I really don't agree with, really, I have such a strong sense of right and wrong and equality. If I hear somebody saying things that I think are evil, I can think that's evil. I would love for that speech to be suppressed. right? I think them sharing that is destructive, it is wrong, or whatever. And then it doesn't take me long to remember that's how people have seen astrology. That's exactly what people have thought. They've used those words to describe astrology. And let us not forget that. The same things, that it's evil, it's charlatan, it's putting awful things in the world, it's screwing people's beliefs, their brains, it's fraud, it's this, it's that, right? These are things that have been said about us. And so we need to approach these things with humility. Also, what we might like it that someone doesn't get to say what they say, but as an astrologer, my antenna goes up. Okay, let's go through a couple of these charts very quickly. I want to say we get to a near, this is about as close as we get to Neptune conjunct Saturn this year in July. But what we are going to have is Uranus Neptune sextile exact. Look how close we get to this grand sextile, right? It gets mighty close. Uranus and Neptune do get exact. Pluto doesn't quite get to the minute exact, but to the degree, yes. And so in the middle of this year, this is the taste, right? This is the taste of what might change. What are we embracing? What are we not looking at the consequences of, right? What are some of us not really, we might see things happening and think this is really good, but what does it actually mean, right? Like right now, for example, in universities, one of the things in American universities they're trying to implement is students not being allowed to wear face masks. Now, why are they doing that? Because they want to document by AI. They want to use AI to start creating files of people. Recently, it was literally, it must have been in 2022. So it wasn't like it was just recently. 2022, maybe early 2023. I was transiting internationally, right? Brazil, New Jersey to Canada. I was transiting. I had to get onto the plane that was going to take me to Canada from New Jersey. And let me tell you, I got up to an automatic door. It didn't ask for my passport, my boarding pass. It just took a picture of my face and it opened up. And there you go. I'm on an international flight out of the country. I was shocked by that. I was like, oh, wow, okay, this technology is here. I didn't have to register for it. It wasn't like I signed up for anything. No, it knew by my face that, oh yeah, she's going back to Canada. It's all good. Yeah, that making that system bigger and stronger is part of the intent, right? Some of us might see it as a good thing. Yeah, we want to keep track of people. We want to know if they're doing something bad. And if somebody does something, we want to be able to identify them right away. And that might be how it's positioned. But this is where the possibility, the dream, the excitement of the change, but there's going to be a surprise factor. It might feel like it comes out of nowhere. This is where things kick in just in time for Valentine's Day. It actually perfects just after this, right? And so forgive me. I was just so excited by Valentine's Day. I made the chart for Valentine's Day, but you could see, right? The conjunction starts to be exact at 0 degrees of Saturn and Neptune. That starts to happen in 2026. And this is where, while it gets close this year, what's the dream? What's the illusion? What's the lie? And how is it being manifested? We might want to see. Now, what I think is a saving grace here is the fact that it's Aries. And what that means is, yeah, it might be force and power, but this might also be individual agency, individual permission to do what you want to do, to live your life, to have your own sense of individuality. Now, this is the first exact trine of, okay, so this is where we get, the grand sextile exact, right? And this is Neptune, Uranus, and Pluto. However, and as big as that is, this is the really big moment. This is the near Star of David that happens just days later. Imagine the kids born under this, right? This is, I would say, perhaps the most important aspect of the decade. this near Star of David that takes place. It's the moon that kicks it into gear, right? And this is when that energy is so strong and so exact. It is not necessarily questioning, seeing a lot of the potential, being excited about what's changing. It may involve education and technologies, but there's an enthusiasm with it that's likely to be there. And this can be more people feeling as if they're able to think for themselves, be themselves. But this might also be greater implementations of control that the collective is thinking is really good. Now, this could be the proliferation and normalization of new technologies, which would be amazing. But it might also be how those technologies are being tapped into so that they're being documented. And what do we feel about it? Why do we feel the way that we do? Well, we're not going to start asking those really important questions, but I think that immediately after this, we will. Chiron just steps into Taurus at this point. And so we will be asking some questions at that point, but it'll be the very beginning. It's not the peak strength of, hey, people, look at this. Okay, great. Everybody has access to the internet now, but every keystroke is being documented. Okay, great. Now our eyes control our computers, so we don't even have to use our whatever keypads or whatever, but our eyes and their movements are being documented. Okay, great. We don't even have to use our phones anymore to pay for anything. We can just look into a camera and takes a picture of our eye. That's great. But the consequences of that, right? Let's see. It'll be so fascinating to see what new technologies become the norm. Now, this might also be when we really won't be able to tell the difference between AI and real people. It's very possible because it's like everybody will have an avatar. Everybody will have a doppelganger, if you will. And that can be one way, but there can be really great ways this energy shows up. Like I said, it's great for more people to be empowered, to have access to online tools, to have access to education, right? Can be great, but what are they learning? Who's okay with what they're learning? Who's controlling what's being learned? I think that's part of it as well. I think about all the different things I saw growing up about different tragedies and injustices, you know, the shows that would be on TV that I saw that gave me so much compassion for different realities, different communities, different histories. But what if you're no longer, it's no longer being produced, it's no longer being shared, you're no longer allowed to watch it? Then what happens, right? So I'm not trying to be a downer, but I think we need to approach this with awareness, with consciousness, with self-honesty. So at least we have a choice to decide what part we want to play into it. How are we going to use these energies to our advantage? Okay, so here we get another exact trine of Uranus and Pluto, right? This happens at the 3rd degree. I want to sort of move forward because we're a little bit running out of time, because I have a grand trine in air. I could just keep talking until I could easily add another hour to this presentation. But Uranus trine Pluto for the 3rd time happens here at 6 degrees, okay, in 2027. Now, by this point, this is where Chiron is much more comfortably in Taurus. And this is where you start seeing Chiron really get in to add that square energy, right? But we can see here this, the grand sextile still operational with precision happening in June as well. Into 2028, this is where we get Saturn conjunct Chiron, squaring Pluto. And I think this is going to be a big moment of transition, a big moment of asking, what is the actual cost? But also, I think this is going to be what's going to be the future of work. AI might become a lot more common. So what's that going to mean for the collective? And ideally, we find answers that take into account that human beings need something to do. We need purpose. And if that means because of AI, we work less hours, or because of AI, there's an emphasis placed on personal skills. There's an emphasis placed on actually being somewhere embodied for real, right? Touching each other, actually giving each other that. Then that could be a very powerful way to use that square, because there's going to be this tension there between where our thoughts and ideas and the future taking us and what's actually happening in real time and in real space. Okay. Now, here's what I'm going to say about what does this mean for the future of astrology. Let's hope my computer stays in gear here. The 1910s, we had Uranus in Aquarius, Pluto in Gemini for the first part of that decade. And this is where we saw some of the more notable charges and court stuff. What's it called? I'm not very familiar with the whole court system, but trials. That's it. The trials happen of astrologers. This is where Alan Leo, Evangeline Adams are having their most famous trials take place. And Alan Leo, there's a lot of documentation that says he was so stressed by this constant sense of being persecuted by the British government that it ended up contributing to his death. That's what some people believe. And it's certainly possible, because it's not easy to go through this stuff, right? It's not easy to have to feel like you've got to confront power. And so there might be some of that. But again, my hope is this time the signs are reversed, right? This time it's Uranus in Gemini, it's Pluto in Aquarius. And my hope with that is that it gives us space. Like, let's just have our space, give ourselves permission, and allow that to each other to say, okay, you know what, more than ever, we're going to find ourselves being able to decide on our own reality. And what I mean by that is, again, going back to Vision Pro, people have said, people who've worked in technology for decades have said, it's like nothing they've ever experienced. You put this on and you watch a movie, you get to decide, am I in a theater watching this movie? Am I on the grass in the park where the movie is actually taking place? Right? You get to decide if you want to do it with your friends. It's like your friends are in a movie theater with you sitting there, but you're really in your house just with this thing over your eyes. You get to decide, and it determines your reality. Your eyes are controlling the movements of everything that you see. You're watching a movie with these things on, and you are in the movie, right? You can actually there have been people who've said they saw a video of someone blowing out candles and were shocked that they couldn't smell it. They had the full expectation of being able to smell the candles. Like, they were so immersed that they really thought that they were there. And to me, that means we individually get to experience our own realities. And so my hope is that the future for the future tellers is that we're able to do that. We're able to have our own reality where this matters to us. So we're able to practice it, and we have space to share it where it feels right to us. And we can continue to have livelihood because of it. We continue to have access to the tools that we've become so reliant on in our modern world, like PayPal and other processing systems, right? That we're able to have that so that at least we can have our niche, our space in this very vast, incredible new world that we're on the precipice of understanding. Thank you, guys. So we have, like I was told, keep it to 2 hours. We've got about 10 minutes. Yay, Lori. Okay.
Yay! Thank you, Nadiya. That was a lot of information.
Yeah, I know. I threw a lot out of. I told you, grand trial and error.
It's great.
Talking. That's it. Yeah.
Yeah. And you will be able to watch the replay. I think I might want to go back and listen to it again, because this is such a big aspect that we're going into. And as you pointed out, it's going to take place over years. So it's a really great way that you covered all this information. We do have a few questions. Are you open to taking a few?
Of course.
All righty. I think you might have covered it, but I'm going to ask this question anyway. What do you think AI will have to do specifically with astrology?
That's fascinating because I was mentioning earlier seeing Instagram accounts where it's so obvious this isn't a real person, this is not a real astrologer, but it's someone presenting themselves as that, it's AI, and they're regurgitating some information they found somewhere else, right? There could be that part of it, how it's presented. Now, there can be great things about that because, for example, I often, when I do my class with Kepler, I have students say they don't want to be on camera. Well, that's fine. Right now, if you don't want to be on camera, what happens? You share in text, you find other ways to share what you do. But what if you could create an avatar that allows you to be whoever you want to be, right? It's that duality of air itself, Aquarius, Gemini, Libra. If you look at the glyphs, right, they have this mirroring quality to them. And so they all have this strong duality to each of the signs. And maybe that's a part of how we're able to feel like maybe more of us can share astrology. I think that with AI, it could be seen as an additional tool for some of us, which could be great. But yeah, we're going to have to be mindful of how we're sharing, what we're sharing. I can say this, though, there's something very powerful that happens when the human is there, right? The human sense of, I am with you, I am here in this space. Let's create this sacred space together of a consultation. Like, I mean, for me, I do it online, but that's always part of the intention, is to create a safe space. And that safe space, I would like to think, is priceless. And so maybe that is one way in which the astrologer will be able to continue to thrive and do what they do.
Yeah, yeah, nice. Okay, the next question. With Neptune and Pisces for so long with illusions, delusions, and misinformation, disinformation, conspiracy theories, will Saturn and Neptune and Aries curb some of that stuff?
Well, it'll be interesting because remember, yeah, it is the conspiracies, some of the illusion you mentioned, absolutely. But remember, Aquarius is very alternate reality, right? Aquarius could be very like, okay, no, this is what's going to be real for me, so I'm going to live this, and you decide what's real for you, and you live that, and all is well in a sense. But there is, like right now we're seeing, I really think with Aquarius, it's like, what do we owe each other is going to be part of what's considered. And wherever Neptune goes, there's always going to be an illusion. And so, yes, it's been illusion, delusion with the Piscean energy, but at least it's been the kind where people want to connect with something that feels divine to them, wherever they might find that. And some people do that in a way that makes them more loving. Some people do that in a way that really doesn't. However, Neptune in Aries is going to spiritualize the fight, and there's a healthy fight. There's the spiritual warrior. And so my hope is that we are able to summon the more fierce side of love and the spiritual warrior within, where we become more adamant in our right to do what we do, in our right to have whatever space we are going to have, and however it feels safe for us to be in that space and create that space, that at least we have that so that we can continue to do what we do or evolve it in a way that feels right for us individually and as a community in astrology.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. And this is a clarification question. I thought you said Daddy Yankee was the intermediary of the gods.
Joke. I love you. Thank you, whoever said that. You obviously watch me. Okay. If people who watch me know, I love how sincerely you said that, Lori. You're such a lovely person. Because you might not know, but with me, I am a Daddy Yankee super fan. Let me show you what a super fan I am. This is my Daddy Yankee pillow. Okay, this is my Daddy Yankee pillow. Now, Daddy Yankee retired. He is a Latin urban artist. I learned Spanish listening to his music, and his music is very spicy, and I've loved it. And if you watch me, you know I did a marathon of concerts of his back in 2022 and 2023. And I do joke with my audience and with my students that all roads lead to Daddy Yankee, because I use his charts so often in different things I'm trying to demonstrate. So whoever said that, I love you. That's a joke. That's great, great fun. I love you.
Yeah, that was fun. Okay, the next one. Will Saturn and Aries limit how much the algorithms competition against other algorithms that are destroying access to general knowledge and current affairs? So I guess this is about Saturn and Aries and the algorithms.
Okay, so algorithms, when I think about algorithms, I think a lot about air energy, right? That whole idea of the waves and where we're going to catch the waves and how they're going to be directed and things like that. But what I really do like about Saturn in Aries, even Neptune in Aries, individuality, right? Your right to exist, your right to be you. And I think that might be part of, think about this. This wonderful Canadian legend astrologer, Robin Armstrong. I remember he was one of the first people I interviewed as part of my show Synchronicity Web TV, all the way back. It was like 2008 or 2009, I think it was. I interviewed him, and he's a legend in Canada. And he said in that interview, Saturn needs Neptune and Neptune needs Saturn. And what he meant by that is Neptune on its own is a dream. It's a fantasy, it's a hope, it's a wish. But Saturn on its own can be dire, right? It can be very much hyper fixated on the material and what it defines as real and sticking to it. But together, they can make a dream a reality. And that's part of the gift of them being together. My hope is that it makes more of us awaken to our right to be who we are, especially in the context of, for us, of course, as astrologers and in astrology, that we have a right to be that much more fully.
Lovely. Thank you. There's a question if you have made a prediction on when Imran Khan will get out of prison.
That's also a joke.
Is it? Okay.
That's Andy. He's making a joke because my mom is always asking him that. And she literally, because Andy, you are so funny. Andy stayed with me in Mexico City for a couple of weeks. And I talk to my mom every single day. I have Saturn in Cancer in the first house. No matter where I go in the world, I talk to my mom every day. And she would ask him that. He is the jailed prime minister of Pakistan. And yeah, Andy would know better than I about that.
Okay. Thanks
All
for the
these
humor.
people throwing jokes out there. I know you don't realize it, but these are obviously people who either know me or watch me or whatever. So it's
yeah, and they've been super active in the chat box, which is nice.
I love you guys. Thank you for that.
Yeah. To answer the question, we will have this recording on YouTube this week, and we will also send you an email this week when it's posted with a link. And when if Nadiya wants to share her slides, we will send the link to that as well.
Yeah, of course.
Okay. There's a question about how you see the food supplies impacted in the future with the Great Sextile.
That's interesting because remember, this is about new technologies. I actually don't think, look, we could say that that perhaps with the Taurian energy, with Chiron conjunct Saturn in Taurus, we might be looking at like what is manifesting, including in terms of the plants and what we're doing with it. But when I think of food, yeah, I think Taurus to a certain extent, but I also think Cancer. And so you think about when Pluto was in Cancer like 100 years ago, that was when we saw this real proliferation of things like food rations and things like that. I don't think that's likely, in my humble opinion. And of course, we're astrologers, right? We are interpreting symbols, and ultimately they will reveal themselves as we co-create them together. But it'll be interesting to see what new possibilities, technologies emerge in terms of what's good for the masses. And that might include in terms of food that might be available to people. Or there might be more people saying, hey, we're thinking about the masses. Let's make sure the masses are fed. Let's make sure to get to that. That might be that square, especially of Saturn and and Chiron squaring Pluto.
Okay. Okay, just a few more questions. When was that Sun-Jupiter conjunction again? Do you know off the top of your head?
Yes, it's in the last days of June is when that's happening. So it's going to be like it's got a bit of an orb to it, but we're going to end June with Jupiter and the Sun conjunct, and they are going to be squaring Saturn and Neptune. So that's going to be an important thing to watch.
Great. And then there's a question about your course fees. I think they're talking about your website. Is it in Canadian or American dollars?
It's in American dollars, but if anybody here finds that cost is an issue, even for that, because we do have a choose your tuition rate, but if you find that cost is an issue, just reach out, use the contact form on the website for the school, and you can get a partial or full scholarship should you need, no problem. Just ask for it and you get it. Like
Thank you.
that's the point of the school, is to make quality education available to the masses.
Yeah. And if you were asking about Kepler College, it is US dollars. And we also have scholarships. And I believe Mary posted a link in the chat box. So it is right at the hour. So this is going to be the last question. I'm sorry. I know there's a few more popping up there, but we do have to wrap up. But I thought this would be a really good question to end on. And the question is, besides being a decent human being, what can we do individually to help humanity without going into despair? Do you have any kind of like last thoughts on that as we wrap up?
Yeah, I love that. And I think because my mom has to remind me, you can't save the world, right? She loves to remind me that because she knows how sensitive I am to other people and the challenges and the pains of the world and things like that. I can be such a sensitive soul. So I get it. And what I will say is it's very empowering sometimes to just think about what you can do and focus on that. And I do think that whatever you choose to do, whatever part you play in that, when you come from a place of at least some sense of wanting to understand the wisdom, of seeking, of humility, if there's some way you can do that, then it helps so much to be able to be that much more effective. And I do think that being able to come from some sense of taking whatever piece you can find and acting from that place towards positive change, however you feel called to do that, it makes you so much more effective to contribute to a larger sense of peace in the world. I would like to think so. And I know I have so much more to give when I do those things that I know nurture my soul. And personally, I would just invite you to look at, and I think when somebody comes to me and they say, I'm not at peace, what I do is I look at the moon. I look at their natal moon. And the most immediate advice I give is, okay, if you're not feeling at peace, first thing you should do is act like the sign of your moon. Pay attention to the house that your moon is in natally, because the moon is equilibrium, emotional equilibrium. It's emotional peace. And there's something very powerful that happens when you acknowledge and honor what that feels like for you to be peaceful. And I think from there, whatever actions you take, boy, it ends up being something that can actually contribute that much more positively to the collective.
Yeah, what a beautiful way to wrap up an amazing webinar. Thank you so much. We very much appreciate you being here. So Nadiya Shah, you can catch her at Kepler, you can catch her at Synchronicity University. We thank you so much for being with us today. We'll be back with more webinars. And
yes, my class, some people are asking questions about my class with Kepler.
Oh yeah. Why don't you talk about your class?
Yeah, so let me just say, please, I do have like a detailed, if you scroll down on that page, you'll see a more detailed outline, but we go through so much. Like we go through dealing with haters. We go through election charts. We go through the technical aspects of cameras and Zoom. Are you going to record here? Are you going to record with what kind of lighting and everything? And then we actually like provide that safe space to actually look at each other's videos. And then we focus on making money and all the ways in which you can do that. And every step of the way, let me say, the whole point is mentorship. That's what I find so rewarding about the experience, is that I am there for you. I am a partner with you in your success. So whatever it is that you might need, and my hope is to anticipate that and provide it to you. But even more than that, ask your questions. We have this space that's just dedicated for the people who sign up for the class in Moodle, in the Kepler platform. And in that space, you can ask whatever you want, whenever you want. You message me directly. I check in about every other day with you guys. And that is the point of the class. And that is why it's a small class size. And it always sells out. So if you feel called to the experience, I would love to have you, and I would encourage you to sign up. My big 3 is Cancer rising, Sag moon, Aquarius sun. And yes, join me at Kepler. I love teaching this. I talk about it all year in my videos. I say every summer I teach a class with Kepler on business, and I'll say, oh, I was teaching this with the students, and this is how it applies to this week's horoscope. Like, I do this throughout the year. So please learn more. And if you feel called to it, sign up. It would be wonderful to be some part of your journey towards sharing your astrology or whatever spiritual, esoteric way in which you want to understand entrepreneurism. I'm so happy to be a part of that journey.
Okay, excellent. We're going to wrap up. We'll see you all next time. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.